Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Bolero.
And we are the FAIRtax guys, bringing you a special expanded version of FAIRtax Power Radio. Once a quarter, like every 3 months, we have a special version of FAIRtax Power Radio that we call Walle's FAIRtax World.
Yeah.
Featuring AFFT board member, CPA, and our friend Jade Walle. And we're going to dig into some good stuff this time.
Right. Well, Jade is a CPA. Well, in fact, he's a partner with one of the large accounting firms. And he's an expert not only in CPA stuff, tax policy, and other CPA info, because taxes is not the only thing CPAs do.
And he's not primarily a tax person, but he knows enough about it to discuss it intelligently.
And he really knows the FAIRtax, because when he discovered it, he read everything there was to read about the FAIRtax. So he's very knowledgeable, he's very sharp, and you're going to enjoy this discussion between Bob and Jade, and it's going to be very informative for everybody. So I hope you enjoy this.
Pick Jade's brain on what the proposals that the new administration is proposing, the new tax proposals that President Biden wants to see. And, you pretty well know what they are. We've been talking about them on FTPR. You've been hearing it in the news.
Yep.
And so we just kind of got Jade to go through it line by line. What's this going to do to individuals? What's this going to do to businesses, to the economy in general? Yeah. And I'll give you a hint, it's not good.
So, without further ado,
all right,
here's Jade Walle's FAIRtax World.
Let's roll it.
Okay.
And hello and welcome to FAIRtax Power Radio presents Walle's FAIRtax World. How's that for a new name? So we are pleased, as we always are once a quarter, to be talking with AFFT board member, CPA. You wear a lot of hats, don't you, Jade Walle?
I do from time to time.
All right. Well, I want to dig right into the meat and potatoes of the program today. We have just seen a new president, a new administration inaugurated. I want to pick your brain a little bit about what we may be seeing from this new administration relative to tax policy. Now, given that the Georgia runoffs, went Democratic, that we've got a 50-50 Senate, what are realistic? What do you think President Biden's chances are of getting his tax policies enacted?
Well, that's the question du jour, Bob. And given the reported results of the Georgia Senate runoff with a 50-50 tie in the Senate, with the vice president able to break any tie votes, the result allows Democrats to advance some of Biden's tax proposals in 2021 with only Democrat votes.
Now, that assumes, though, that the filibuster rule remains in place. Comment on that a bit.
Well, the 50-50 Senate result allows Democrats to use the budget reconciliation process. So even if the filibuster is in place or is not in place, or if it's not in place, you get a similar result to reality that using the budget reconciliation process is a viable mechanism to advance some of Biden's tax proposals in 2021 with only Democrat votes. You may recall in 2017, President Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passed the Senate in the same manner. They didn't have a 60-vote supermajority through the budget reconciliation process. And budget reconciliation bills can be passed on three things: spending, revenue, and federal debt limit. And the Byrd rule prohibits reconciliation bills from increasing the federal deficit after a 10-year period or from making changes to Social Security. This is why certain aspects of the Bush 43 tax cuts in the early 2000s and the TCJA from Trump have to be phased out over a 10-year period.
Okay, so is it accurate to say that there really are not as many legislative hurdles as one may think, and Biden's going to have a pretty clear path to getting what he wants in the tax policy arena?
Yeah, while Democrats appear to have gained control of the Senate, the 2020 election results produced unexpected losses for the House Democrats. In the House, a simple majority vote of 218 generally is needed to pass legislation. Democrats currently have a slim 222, so 4 over that 2018, 222 to 211 majority. One New York House race is still undecided, and a Louisiana House seat is vacant due to the recent death of Representative-elect Luke Letlow, who is a Republican. Also, the 2nd District of Iowa's Republican victory is being challenged in the House, where Republican Miller Meeks defeated her Democrat rival by 6 votes. So you had 196,000 something to 196,000 something, 6-vote margin. And although Miller Meeks was sworn into the House, it's on a provisional basis. All this to say that the 222 to 211 margin could change, but if it does, it will likely be even tighter. For example, 222 to 213, since the open Louisiana seat will likely be filled by a Republican. And by last count, the undecided 22nd District of New York has the Republican leading by 351 votes based on the last reported counts.
That's better than 6.
Yeah, 6 or 351. The need for President Biden to gain the near unanimous support of virtually all House Democrats and all 50 Democrat senators is expected to limit the scope of any tax increase legislation. For example, Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia has stated that he would only support increasing the corporate tax rate to 25%, where Biden's plan calls for an increase in the corporate tax rate to 28%. Other moderate House and Senate Democrats are expected to have similar reservations about various Biden tax increase proposals. So, to come full circle and answer your question a little more directly, the scope of any tax increase proposals will be limited by the need to gain the near unanimous support of House and Senate Democrats. I'll temper this by saying that no matter what side of the aisle you hang your hat on, the Democrats are fairly adept at having all their members singing from the same hymnal. So anything is possible in the next 12 to 18 months, and only time will tell how strong West Virginia's Joe Manchin, arguably one of the last remaining blue dog Democrats, will be at sticking to his guns.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, because of that fact, in my personal opinion, it might already be a fait accompli that some kind of tax increase legislation will occur.
Yeah, I think historically we see the way that the Democratic Party hangs together more so than the Republican Party does. I mean, their leadership gives marching orders and everybody just steps in line. So I don't think it's beyond possibility at all that Biden's going to get most of what he wants. But assuming that does happen, that he can get anything he wants through the Congress, exactly what are we looking at? What are some of the specific things that he's going to want to get through?
You've got the key Biden business tax proposals and individual include increasing the U.S. corporate tax rate to 28% from 21%. You might remember with the TCJA that Trump passed in 2017, Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, it went from 35% down to 21%.
And he wants to
Biden also
28.
Yeah, so kind of meeting in the middle, if you will.
Well, that's just a cost of doing business. It's going to get passed on to you and me. We all know that.
Absolutely. And I think we'll touch on that just a little bit more here. Next, he wants to impose a 15% minimum tax on companies' global book income and double the current minimum tax on profits earned by foreign subsidiaries of U.S. firms, raising it from 10.5% to 21%. In addition, he's proposed to roll back income and estate tax reductions from the 2017 Tax Reform Act. Lost my earpiece. For taxpayers with incomes above $400,000. To tax capital gains and dividends as ordinary income for individuals with incomes above $1 million, and tax incomes above $400,000 with the 6.2% Social Security tax.
But it looks like he's aiming his tax proposals at the wealthiest taxpayers, which they always say they're going to do. Isn't that like picking on the biggest guy in the schoolyard? That doesn't always end well, does it?
No, that's fair. Well, and there's this gentle balance and equilibrium and dance with how much you can tax the people that are at the higher end of the wealth scale, the people that are, predominantly all the small business owners in America that create and employ the majority of working Americans. And at what point do the disincentives overpower the incentives such that motivation and drive and vigor are reduced to a level where nothing gets done?
It seems to me this might also drive evasion up. Your opinion on that?
I think that's fair. Anytime you have legislation that seeks to take a lot of money out of someone's or some group's or some business's pocket, You'll try every avenue of legal tax avoidance, but as just a fact of human nature, you will also get an increase in innovation. I think that's a fair assumption.
Okay, well, let me back up to something you said just a second ago about the capital gains tax, which have been taxed at a different rate than ordinary income. Why is this so important? What's the impact going to be of messing with the capital gains tax rates?
Good question. Current long-term, and long-term means investments held over a year, current long-term capital gains tax rates are 0% up to around $39,000 of income if you're single, $79,000 if you're married, and then increase to 15% for incomes above $39,000 up to $244,000, and then above $79,000 up to $489,000 if you're married. Finally, the current capital gains tax rate increases to 20% when you have incomes above these thresholds. And for these income amounts, capital rates are lower than the general income tax bracket rates, which currently span from 10 to 37%, depending on your income level. So, of course, Biden has proposed to increase the top income tax bracket from 37 back to 39.6%, and then, of course, tax all capital gains at these normal income earning tax brackets. So, the economic consensus has been for decades that lower capital gains tax rates are beneficial to everyone in the economy, as it encourages investment, which leads to new businesses that need employees, that lead to more earnings in the economy from these employees, that lead to more taxes collected by the Treasury, and more innovation from these businesses that is generally thought to better American life.
Okay, if everybody seems to agree that taxing capital gains at a lower rate is a good idea, why are they doing this? What economic sense does it make?
Well, it doesn't make economic sense. And if you remember back to the 2008 Democrat primary debates with Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, Barack was challenged on why he wanted to increase capital gains rates to higher levels. And he said, he actually just admitted that it really has nothing to do with economics. It's just a matter of fairness. So I think, and we'll touch on this a little bit more, envy comes in, and the idea that the folks that are investing more, perhaps at the higher end of the earnings bracket, should just pay more and pay their fair share. But increasing capital gains taxes, though, Bob, and you alluded to this, at some point has the effect of discouraging investment, discouraging risk-taking and innovation. Since when the economic reward is muted and reduced to a low enough level, if we really put ourselves into the shoes of an up-and-coming entrepreneur, risking everything we have, every last dollar to dive in headfirst into a new venture, why would we want to risk everything to have 30, 40, 50% or more of the fruits of our labor, if and only if we're successful, taken away from us in taxes? There is a point where people will not work, they'll not create, and they'll not invest in new ventures if the reward is not adequate. And this is the very reason why in the former Soviet Communist Society, where wealth accumulation outside of government personnel was not permitted, and the Communist Manifesto's theory of a heavy graduated taxation system was in place, that ordinary working people stopped innovating. They stopped blazing new trails, and it's why the entire system eventually failed. Other factors were at play, no doubt, but a foundational aspect of a society that has no motivation to dream, no incentive to create, no ambition in the soul, is that this society will lumber and labor and walk through life with no spring in their step and no passion for anything greater than their current station in life that was assigned to them. Wealth envy is a very real driver in many aspects of our life, including the Communist Manifesto, and at the heart of many of the proposed tax increases we'll see today. And we have to remember, always remember as human beings, we love to dream, reach, move forward, and improve our stations in life, whatever they may be. And that's the miracle and opportunity of America. Ronald Reagan summed it up nicely when he discussed in 1975, several years before he was inaugurated as the 40th president. He was discussing how a young man who was debating a socialist, and how the socialist was criticizing anyone who wanted to pursue the finer things in life. And Reagan noted that, and I quote, "Socialists ignore the side of man that is of the spirit. They can provide shelter, fill your belly with bacon and beans, treat you when you're ill, all the things that are guaranteed to a prisoner or a slave, but they don't understand we also dream, yes, even of owning a yacht.
Wow, that's pretty good. I think he was pretty visionary. He
was, wasn't he?
All right. Well, what would just for the sake of example here, what would the capital gains taxation look like under the fair tax?
This is why I love the fair tax. It's 0%. Any income, including investment income and capital gains income, where investments are sold at a profit, there are no taxes whatsoever. Talk about an incentive to go out there and invest and dream and reach for some innovative product. You can make all the money you want, really live the American dream and not worry about taxation. But don't worry, Bob. When people make a ton of money, what do they usually do with that money?
Well, they either spend it or save it or invest it.
That's right. And when we invest, we've had all the experts say that's great because then that's more jobs and more businesses and more innovation. When we save it, I think you and Ron on FAIRtax Power Radio amply say that savings is just deferred spending.
Correct.
And spending is spending. And so under a fair tax, a consumption tax, that means even more spending, more innovation, more investment, and more economic stimulus.
Makes me wonder why politicians on both sides of the aisle don't understand that. And the fair tax has been in Congress for over 20 years now, has died in committee every single year it's been there. Why can't they see what you just talked about?
Well, that's the age-old question, and I always hate it when you hit me with this question, Bob, because there's not a good answer. And what I've come to believe and understand, and I think is true, is politicians don't operate on logic and common sense. They really are in every 2-year survival cycle where they need heat. Heat makes them act, and we have not been good enough. We should raise our hands as supporters of the fair tax. We haven't been good enough at providing the heat necessary to make this a reality.
All right, now let's get back to some more of these specifics about Biden's tax plan relative to the estate tax. Elaborate on that a little bit.
Yep. So the Tax Foundation, it's a non-ideological, non-partisan think tank, reported on October 2nd of 2020 that Biden would tax wealth at death by as much as 67%. Specifically, Biden is proposing 2 major tax increases on accumulated wealth. First, in an unprecedented move, Biden would tax unrealized capital gains at death for taxpayers with incomes above $400,000, as opposed to the investments held at death transferring to their beneficiaries at a carryover basis or a new stepped-up basis at date of death with no capital gains or estate tax. And so, unrealized capital gains, I just want to pause for a second and make sure all of our listening audience kind of understands. That's when maybe you've invested $20 in your eBay stock, Bob, but you haven't sold it yet. It's just sitting there. And maybe on paper, because you read the Wall Street Journal and the stock price went from $10 to $11. So the one share you bought, you have a $1 unrealized. Yeah, you made a buck, but you haven't really realized it. You don't have cash in hands,
it's not in
and you
pocket
can't.
Yet.
It's exactly, you can't spend it. So this proposal is unusual because other than the mere fact that someone died, which last time I checked, we're unable to avoid over the long term, there's no true earnings event, to your point, Bob, no crystallization or realization of profit, contrasted with when you actually dispose of an appreciated investment and truly realize and have access to the increase in value. So in this case, there would be a 20% capital gains tax assessed, even though there was no earnings event or realization of the profit, plus the 3.8% net investment income tax that came about when Obamacare was enacted. Then what's left over, a little over 75% of your investment, would be subject to the estate tax, aka death tax, which, as we'll discuss in a little bit, could then take nearly half of what is left over. This is how the Tax Foundation got to their 67% tax rate at death statistic.
Wow. Okay. I'm not quite sure we've got this question fully answered yet. What about this death tax? I've read Biden wants to roll the estate tax back to 2009 levels where the top rate was 45% compared to 40% today. Now, I know there's more to it, but it doesn't sound like a transformational change here yet. What are we missing?
You're correct when you note that Biden wants to roll the estate tax back to 2009 levels, when the top rate was 45% compared to 40% today. The rub is the threshold used to determine when the death tax rate is applied. Under current law, only the estate's value above $11.5 million is subject to the death tax. Biden's proposal would lower this threshold to $3.5 million for single taxpayers. This proposal drops the death taxation threshold by 2/3. To most Americans, having an estate worth $3.5 million may sound exorbitant, but I can tell you of horror story after horror story of meager farmers whose families have owned their parcels of land for decades, if not longer, have had their farms, families, and estates destroyed by this lower death tax threshold back when it was in effect, where many times that have been very well documented, family farms have had to be sold off and liquidated in order to pay the burdensome death tax. Although $3.5 million is nothing to scoff at, it is not as large of an estate as it used to be, say 20 or 30 years or more ago.
Oh, yeah.
Especially in higher cost living states on the coast. It's easy for blue collar Americans to amass sizable estates, primarily due to skyrocketing home values over the decades. For example, I have a great aunt who lives in Northridge, California, and a suburban LA, who has been there for probably at least 30 to 40 years. Her small home, 2 bedrooms, is close to Cal State Northridge, and is valued at probably around $1 million when she probably paid $30,000 to $40,000 for it years ago. So, to come full circle, despite Congress generally understanding that it's bad policy on all fronts to levy both capital gains taxes and estate death taxes on the same assets, Biden's plan would jump fully on board with this double taxation. If we think about our investments outside of 401ks, we've already paid taxes on the income we use to make our investments, including our home purchases. When investing in stocks or bonds, especially corporate stocks and dividends, a corporate business income tax was already paid prior to distributing the dividends. And now under Biden's plan, after all that, we'd pay capital gains tax and estate taxes at death. In some cases, this is actually 4 layers of taxation.
Wow. What did the Tax Foundation have to say about the effect of all this and, what that would do to the economy?
They note that all things being equal, Biden's proposal would bring in $280 billion over 10 years. With all these stimulus packages, that sounds just like a drop in the bucket, but $280 billion over 10 years. But this would come with a 0.15% reduction in the size of the economy. This may not sound large, but in a $30 trillion economy, this 0.15% economic reduction amounts to $46 billion annual reduced U.S. economic activity. And so this means that over 10 years, the Biden plan would reduce economic activity by twice as much as the increase in tax dollars to the Treasury. Bob, does this feel like we're going backwards to you?
Well, yeah, kind of does. Why? Why would any thinking person, this incoming new administration, I assume that they have brains and know how to use them, why would they want to increase corporate taxes from 21 to 28? And, kind of expand on how this thing is passed down through the system to consumers.
Yeah, and Bob, you do a great job on this with you and Ron and the FAIRtax Power Radio episodes. Anytime you raise the corporate tax rate, it manifests itself in the price of the goods and services that the business produces, and ultimately ends up with consumers paying this increase at the register in the form of embedded taxes on average. And you all touched on this in one of your recent FAIRtax Power Radio episodes, I think 241, that on average representing 22% of the cost of everything we purchase. So why would we want to go backwards when the 2017 TCJA finally lowered our anti-competitive corporate tax from 35 to 21%? Well, I think the simple fact is that a higher corporate tax rate disincentivizes companies from coming to the U.S. And so this is, again, to your point, doesn't make sense. It results in higher prices like we discussed that we consume in our daily lives. The fair tax has a 0% corporate income tax rate, which will make the U.S. the tax haven of the world and lower these embedded taxes and ultimately the cost of everything we consume day to day. We could have an entire show on this aspect of the fair tax, but it's fair to say that the picture portrayed that greedy and profitable corporations and businesses can afford to pay a little more, their fair share, if you will, is complete nonsense. Corporations and businesses do not have heartbeats, they do not breathe, and don't raise a family. Every individual in America eventually pays these corporate taxes in the form of higher prices for retail goods and services, or in less wage growth, fewer jobs, loss of jobs, less R&D and related innovation, and ultimately in fewer dividends and owner's equity and appreciation. There's another aspect here that is often overlooked when we think about these corporate taxes and how they change every few years. You and Ron touched on this in episode 241 of FAIRtax Power Radio. What were some of the highlights around compliance costs from your and Ron's research for episode 241 as it relates to compliance costs when it comes to the amount of time and money spent complying with the burdensome tax code?
That's just crazy. It's just plain common sense. When you raise the cost of doing business, you raise the prices to the consumers. Now, I got to go kind of off in the weeds a little bit. Has anybody ever defined what a wealthy person's or a rich evil corporation's fair share is? They keep saying they're not paying their fair share, but they never seem to tell you what the fair share would be.
I've never heard that defined. Isn't that interesting? I think it's a intentional moving target, and it can be whatever the politicians need it to be. It's convenient.
Okay.
Well, you didn't answer my question, Bob. You didn't answer my question about compliance costs that companies and individuals have to deal with.
It's insane. For some small businesses, the compliance costs are 5, 6, 7 times what the actual tax liability is. You know, people don't understand. Time is money. Everybody hears that. But every hour, every millisecond that you have to spend keeping records, filling out forms, just all the hoops and things you've got to jump through to comply with the tax code. I mean, I could sit here for the next half hour and could just barely scratch the surface. And I have never been a small business owner, but I know a few people that are. We've interviewed some of them on FAIRtax Power Radio. The compliance costs are just killers.
It really is. And I think when you guys talked about it, Bob, it was in the billions of hours a year, billions with a B.
Yeah, I don't remember a lot of those numbers off the top of my head, but I know that it is just staggering. And it's staggering to me as well why more small business owners, even larger business owners, are not on board with a fair tax. I mean, what's going on there?
I know. Well, billions of hours, and I think one of the best estimates I've heard is $600 billion in annual cost, compliance cost, just to comply, not the actual cost of the taxes. And so, just imagine with the fair tax, virtually all income tax and compliance costs are eliminated from not only your personal living room, but in corporate America. So, billions are spent each year to comply, like we said, often with multi-millions going to accounting firms like my own, where we assist large Fortune 500 companies compliance with the U.S. tax code. I'm not sure who worked on GE's 2010 taxes, but it was widely reported that they had $14.2 billion in worldwide profit and $5.1 billion of that coming from the U.S. However, GE had zero corporate income tax obligation in 2010, and in fact, claimed a tax benefit of $3.2 billion. We'll let that sink in a second, but does this sound like our U.S. corporate income tax is working? In this case, what say you, Bob?
I wonder how much they had to spend to get that return compiled and submitted that shows us how much money did they have to spend to get to that zero bottom line?
I can guarantee you that GE's 2010 tax returns pages had to have numbered in the thousands. And I'd imagine the accounting firm assisting them in this grand feat had to have service fees in the tens of millions. Just my guess. This is the system that the corporate income tax fosters and nurtures. And Bob, I'll ask you a question. Do you believe in your heart of hearts that this is what our founding fathers intended, and this is what the normal hardworking American envisions for an effective, fair, and efficient tax system?
I assume that's a rhetorical question.
No. It is a rhetorical, that's not the way the system should work.
Well, the fact that the founding fathers outlawed in the original Constitution direct taxation. We've mentioned before that the founding fathers would be just astounded at how intrusive, how much information you have to give to the government on a tax return. And then you think, well, they'd be astounded that tax returns even exist in the first place because they outlawed all of that in the original Constitution. They knew what the direct taxation, the evils of the direct taxation would do to people, would do to the economy. And they said, we ain't going to have none of that here. And of course, it took a constitutional amendment to bring the income tax in.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. My only wish, and there's several aspects of the Constitution, is that some of this could have just been written in a little more plain English in the original Constitution. Everything you said is right. The Constitution in a Supreme Court ruling, I think it was Pollock in the late 1800s, confirmed that direct taxation that was outlawed in the Constitution absolutely meant you cannot have an income tax. That was not up for debate. But if it was just a little more straightforward, absolutely no income tax, I think it would have made our lives easier. Not that the 13th Amendment, 16th Amendment in 1913 still wouldn't have came about, but I lament that. I wish some things were just in a little bit more plain English, but this was written in the 1700s, so plain English meant something different at that time. But absolutely, and I think the founders were wise in that, realizing that when you start taxing income, you ultimately end up with a system that discourages the very dreams that were sought after with the founding of America, to better your station in life, because now you insert envy into the equation, which starts to, at the foundational underpinnings of America, starts to degrade it.
Now, if I've got my historical facts correct, those people, the politicians of the time that were opposing an income tax, they gambled. They took a really big gamble and says, okay, we'll go along with it if you can get this constitutional amendment passed. Now, passing constitutional amendments by design is not an easy thing to do. So they were banking on the fact that this amendment would not get through. And then when it did, it was one of those, well, I can't say that here on a friendly show, kind of moments.
No, you're exactly right. I think it was arguably one of the worst calculated political blunders in American history, where the Republicans in the late 1800s and early 1900s kind of went along with the growing theme of let's soak the rich and implement an income tax. And don't worry, it'll only hit the top 0.5%, and you'll never even know it's around. And so the Republicans said, yeah, okay, I'll get on board, but there was a Supreme Court ruling, so only if you get the Constitution amended will I play along. And man, when that the bluff was called, so to speak, by the Democrats at the time, and the constitutional amendment sailed through the House, the Senate, and then, as you know, 3/4 of the states had to ratify, and it was a slam dunk, unfortunately.
Well, I think it's because people believed the rhetoric that you just touched on. This is going to be a really small tax. It's going to hit a very small percentage of the company. So go ahead and give us this power, because we're not going to use it on you. And, that was 1913 when it came in. 1943, 30 years, a generation later, not only was it hitting everybody, they implemented withholding, so they get your money before you see it. Now, that's just lightning speed that the politicians were shown to have been not telling the truth when they're on their original selling points.
Yes. And how come, Bob, the proponents of an income tax and then eventually withholding during the World War II times, how come they're the best marketers on planet Earth? Like we just talked about in the early 1900s, great marketing. It worked. The Republicans gambled, backfired in their face. And then in the 1940s, the government actually employed the talents of Disney and Donald Duck to have these kind of propaganda shorts before the movies in the theaters, where they described how it was your patriotic duty to have your income tax withheld from your paychecks, because you might remember back in the day, you just paid your tax at the end of the year and you could see it all. It was visible and you had a little more feel of what your obligation really was. Yeah. Withholding changed all that, but it was your patriotic duty, and Donald Duck was telling you about it. Yeah, great marketing.
I'm dating myself here, but I remember a particular episode of the Dukes of Hazzard, where Boss Hogg stood up and said, I am going to withhold your county taxes from your paycheck. So if Boss Hogg thinks withholding is a good idea, it's got to be everything but. I assume you didn't see that particular episode.
I don't recall that. Although when I was very young, I watched those religiously after school, remember Bo and Luke and Daisy and Roscoe Pico Train and all those. But that sounds like Boss Hogg, doesn't it?
I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay, let's get back to the FAIRtax here. How, in your CPA brain here, how can you explain to people exactly what it would do, especially for the working poor? Hit on that.
Yes. Well, the thing that, if we think about with the current party in power, and again, no commentary on wherever you hang your hat from a political affiliation standpoint, the Democrats, one of their items that they tend to try and hold a flag up for is saying, listen, we're the party of the working poor. And so if that's the case, let's examine what the FAIRtax would do to the working poor relative to the income and payroll tax system. And so the FAIRtax has what's called the prebate, which you and Ron talk about all the time.
We just did a whole show on that a couple of weeks ago.
Right. And the prebate is what makes the FAIRtax fair. And it basically refunds your taxes paid when you go and consume and pay the FAIRtax at the register. It refunds all of those at the beginning of the month, so you're not paying taxes on the basic necessities of life. So if you let's take a fictitious working poor person, as they get their paycheck every week, almost 10% is immediately taken out with the regressive payroll tax. With the prebate and the FAIRtax system, they keep their whole paycheck, no withholdings, and they're getting the prebate, so they're really not paying taxes. We forget many times that the current regime that we operate under is the income and payroll tax, and that payroll tax is so hard on the working poor. So and again, when we talk about payroll taxes, it's that Social Security that's 6.2, and I think the Medicare is 1.45, but don't quote me. But under the FAIRtax, all consumption, even by the uber wealthy who spend millions, are paying the FAIRtax on their retail purchases, which by legislations includes Social Security taxes. Right now in 2021, those uber wealthy, they're only paying Social Security tax on up to $142,800 of income. It was 130.
What if there's some kind of ceiling above which these payroll taxes no longer apply? So they are aimed specifically at the lower end of the scale. People that people that are above that ceiling no longer pay it. They pay it up to that amount. But if I'm making $5 million a year and you're only going to charge me payroll taxes on $142,000 of that, I'm making out like a bandit.
That's exactly right. Now, other people will argue, Bob, and say, well, listen, if I'm paying that Social Security tax on $142,800, that's the current ceiling in 2021. If I were to pay that 6.2% on my 1 million of income, let's say you make 1 million, am I ever going to get that back in Social Security? If truly that tax is meant to just be a down payment of mine and I'll get it back later when I retire, you will not get 6.2% of $1 million on an annual basis if you follow.
Yeah, that sounds like the same politicians that sold the income tax in the first place.
Yes. Well, one of Biden's proposals is that up to $142,800, you pay your Social Security tax, and then if your income is above $400,000, you would pay that 6.2% on any income over $400,000. So that person making $1 million of income, and I realize those folks are rare, that person would pay that 6.2% Social Security tax and Medicare 1.45 on everything up to $142,800. The Medicare on everything, that's always been on everything, the 1.45%. But then again, that 6.2% Social Security tax on $401,000 up to $1 million, meaning about $600,000 there. So $600,000 at 6%, you're, what are we talking there? Over $28,000 or so extra taxation there under Biden's proposal.
Wow. We do not hear a groundswell of support. We don't hear a lot of people, outside the Beltway calling for the FAIRtax. Could that be that this not enough people understand it yet? What's going on?
I think so. I don't think we've really gotten it out there. Every single person I talk to about the fair tax, when you have enough to spend 5 or 10 minutes, and that's really all it takes. It's not that complicated. Everyone says, "Oh, I can't tell you how many times I've heard this. Why aren't we doing this?" Have you ever received that reaction?
That was my mom's reaction when I first explained this to her and let her read the book. She looked at me and says, "Why aren't we doing this already?" It makes so much sense. And we've been trying. FAIRtax Power Radio has been on the air, or on the internet anyway, for 5 years. And I have no idea how many people we've reached or how many people we've actually educated and made FAIRtax supporters out of. But it's clearly not enough. We need to get more people understanding what the fair tax is, because if I'm not mistaken, once you understand it, you'll demand it.
You'll demand it. That's right. That is exactly right.
All right. Now, again, back to the working poor. There are ways under the fair tax that they can minimize their tax liability even more. They're going to get all of the tax paid on their basic necessities refunded, but above that, there are still ways to keep your taxable spending down under the fair tax. Touch on that.
Absolutely. That's another great thing about why the fair tax is better for the working poor than really, quite frankly, either party in Washington can propose. So legal tax avoidance. If we remember, the fair tax is only a tax at the retail level on new goods and services. And so what that means is, for quite a large percentage of our expenditures in our working lifetime, let's think about homes, cars, quite a large percentage.
The big stuff.
The big stuff. Quite right now, already, all home purchases in the U.S., it's about 88% of them are pre-owned homes. So, and what that means is, like, 9 out of 10 home purchases, they're used homes. That means you wouldn't pay the fair tax on a new home purchase, and arguably your largest lifetime expenditures. Likewise, automobiles, the gently owned, pre-owned used car market is huge. And you're always going to have those people that want to pay a little bit extra and buy a new car. And a new car would have the fair tax imposed on it. Of course, the cost would be lowered because the embedded taxes would fall out, subject for another day. But you're always going to have those folks that want to buy a new car because they like new things, which will also, though, with the fair tax, increase the value of used cars because there'll be more demand because there's no fair tax, which will naturally create an equilibrium between the value of new cars and used cars, such that it'll get back into a natural balance where there'll be an appropriate amount of purchases of both. Because some people say, oh, well, the new car market will just fall apart because people won't want to pay the fair tax. And that's just not how economics work. An equilibrium will be found there. So to come back to your question, the working poor, again, can avoid large sums of paying the fair tax by purchasing used goods, even gently used clothing. My wife and I have gone to used clothing stores or furniture stores like that, and you can get some great apparel and furniture sometimes. And that's just going to be smart, because then what does that mean for that working poor individual trying to advance their station in life? They're getting the full prebate, as if every dollar they spent on the necessities of life was taxed, but it might not be taxed. So that means they're actually up a little bit more than they would have been otherwise, and it can help them get ahead in life.
All right, let me try to summarize this a little bit. It seems to me, listening to the Biden tax proposals, that what you're hearing is political rhetoric rather than just economic reality. That they are, to use one of my favorite phrases, they're just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. There's no real relief is coming, even though they try to pitch it as such. And, we still have the criminal enterprise known as the IRS. You still got tax returns. You still got audits. You're still going to have all the nasty things that come with it, income tax. What are they doing? How are they getting away with that?
Well, you summed it up. It's just more of the same, and it's piled higher and deeper. So I'd say to help them not get away with that, let's ask our congressional representatives. Let's ask everyone listening. And I know I was nervous to do this at first, but I did it, and I was surprised how it was not a big deal to actually go talk to your congressman or your congresswoman. And I did it and talked about the fair tax. Guess what their reaction was? Oh, this makes sense. just like your mom, Bob.
Oh, it's been in Congress for 20 years. Where have you been?
Yes. So let's ask our congressional representatives. Let's put a challenge out there. Go and talk to them and put your opinion on and PopVox, like you and Ron always say, POPVOX, and change this and stop trying to put lipstick on a pig by changing the tax code every few years, increasing the uncertainty for businesses and individuals as it relates to tax planning and investment growth and hiring. The thing we have going for us, Bob, is that this is an easy sell. The FAIRtax is simple, effective, visible, and put simply, a more efficient mechanism to collect the coffers that the Treasury currently collects compared to the outdated and overappreciated, I might say, IRS and the income and payroll tax system we are currently forced to subsist with. And this horrible, burdensome tax code that's 70,000 plus pages.
Yeah, that nobody understands, that nobody, and when you sign your tax return, you are, testifying to the fact that you do understand it all, that this is, I'm, doing everything this way. Now, I have never talked to anyone who just, about the FAIRtax, that just flat came back in my face and says, that's a horrible idea. I've had a few folks that were obviously highly partisans that were saying, I don't know about that. That sounds too conservative, but I'll think about it. Have you ever had anybody just flatly reject the FAIRtax to your face when you explain it to them?
I have not. I've had several people say, well, the political reality, that's going to be tough. You'll never get that passed. But, I think it was Nelson Mandela that said something to the effect that things may seem impossible until they get done. So I reject that at face value. But no, I've never heard anyone say that just doesn't make sense. The income tax is better, more efficient, more effective, more fair, less evasion. It's because it's just not true. So to answer your question, no.
And one more thing, the FAIRtax will not put you and your other CPAs out of business.
No, I'm a CPA, and actually I've talked to some very smart, some deals guys, some investment guys, and when I explained it to them, about 5-10 minutes, they're like, wow, this is going to incentivize investment. And so maybe the accounting firms have a realignment. The tax line of service for the most part will fall off in sunset, and that's okay, because the other aspect, acquisitions, divestitures, investments, carve-outs, new entities, new investments, startups, will, in my opinion, not only offset, but will more than offset the loss of the traditional tax compliance line of service. So, and by the way, Bob, it's a misconception. Most CPAs, actual majority, aren't tax guys. Like for my example, myself, I knew enough tax to pass the CPA, but the CPA exam, actually less than 1/4 of it was income and corporate and business tax related. Can you believe that? Less than 1/4.
Now, I do remember that in past years, you've gone out to Oklahoma State University, did a practicum course with the graduate level CPA students, and you would present to them on the FAIRtax. These are people who are looking at having a career, making a living off of the tax code. What has been their reaction to the FAIRtax once you explained it to them?
Every time we'll always ask at the end of our sessions, like, does this sound like a good idea? I get anywhere from 90 to 100% of those students raising their hands. And to your point, these are students about to graduate with their Masters of Science in Accounting and go out and work in the income tax field. They still raise their hand and say, it's a great idea. So, I mean, that speaks volumes.
Because I guess they understand that there's more to being a CPA than just doing taxes.
They do. They really do. They really do. There's about 90 to 100,000 IRS employees at any given time in the bureaucracy, but with such a large influx of business to the U.S. that the FAIRtax would bring, the tax haven of the world, and the other needs for businesses. These jobs, because you always think about, the real human effect, and we should never make light of it when folks lose their jobs. But I think the vast majority of folks that work in the tax field, tax line of service for the large accounting firms, even the IRS, will have skills that will translate into other aspects of accounting and compliance and other aspects. I think there'll be a very small percentage, and let's call it about 1 million people in the United States who would be directly affected, like H&R Block folks and tax line of service professionals. My conservative, humble estimate is that 95%, so 950,000 out of those million, would have jobs within a month or two because they're just that skilled with their CPA and accounting credentials. Okay, well, let me ask you got your crystal ball one more time. I think we have pretty well agreed that the Biden tax proposals, we'll have to see what actually comes through and gets through Congress and gets signed. But in general, what's being proposed is not good for the economy. It's going to hurt people. It's going to hurt the economy. Do you think that might possibly create more of a demand for the fair tax when people realize, hey, what they're shoving at us now is just not working. There's got to be a better way to do this. Yes, the short answer is yes. I think it was Abraham Lincoln who said the best way to get rid of bad legislation is to enforce it strictly. Mm-hmm. And so I think when you introduce even more onerous aspects of the income tax code that's already 70,000 plus pages of confusion, you're going to have more and more instances of people that have, let's call them the harmful effects of the IRS, such as civil asset forfeiture and other unreasonable restrictions or just downright strippings of freedoms. And I think the more outrage, the more ill treatment, the more strict enforcement of bad legislation, it will help us on our journey to enact the fair tax. I hope you're right. Well, we're just about out of time here, so I do want to thank you for taking this last hour to talk to us. And you'll be back with us again in 3 months. That's right. And Bob, thank you for taking the time. We can do this. So again, let's challenge everyone listening to FAIRtax Power Radio. Let's get a meeting set up with your congressman. And if you were like me, you go through the website, you end up sending an email, and you don't hear back in a week or two. And you end up having to follow up 2-3 times. And you just have to be persistent, and they'll eventually get with you, and it's usually one of their staffers. But let's do that. And if we can have just in all 435 congressional seats in the U.S., if just 5 people in each district, just 5. So we're not talking a gargantuan event here, but just if 5 people talk to their congressperson about the fair tax in each of those 435 districts, do you realize how much this would be on the news and on the nighttime shows and at the forefront of conversation for proposed tax legislation change? Yeah, it's almost as if the media has got a moratorium on anybody talking about the fair tax. That's crazy. But I say we got to wrap this up here in just a second. We'll be looking for you again like next March or April. Any idea what we can look forward to then? No, let's challenge. I think you guys start March. This is my suggestion. You can run your own FAIRtax Power Radio show, but let's ask the listeners to throw out some ideas for the topic for our next quarterly get together. And maybe the folks with the best idea that you and Ron think have the most interesting, innovative, unique idea to discuss, maybe we could even have them on and have them ask me a question directly on the next go round. Oh, all right. Well, we'll see if we can make that work. But again, thanks for your time, and we look forward to seeing you again next time. Thanks, Bob. And welcome back to FAIRtax Power Radio. That was a pretty interesting discussion, would you say?
It was great. See, I told you, Jade really knows his stuff, and of course, Bob knows his stuff too. So when you get a discussion going between 2 knowledgeable people, it's good for everybody. It's informative. So we certainly hope you enjoy that and tell everybody else about it.
The primary takeaway I took out of that thing was that what you are hearing from the new incoming administration is political rhetoric, not economic good sense.
Yeah.
And Jade was really good on explaining why a lot of the proposals that are coming through, they sound good, to the
on the surface,
to red meat to some people of a certain political ideology, but they are just not what the economy needs.
No, unfortunately. So, but I guess we have to do this every few years, to remind us what good tax policy really means. So we'll see.
Explain to people that good tax policy is HR 25, the fair tax. Get rid of the income tax and all the nasty stuff that comes with it.
H.R. 25 is the best tax policy anybody could make. And we're going to need your help to get to inform our Congress critters to make sure that, if things do start to go south, there's a good avenue for the FAIRtax to get in there.
All right, so, and speaking of input from the audience, Jade had a really good idea right there at the end. We try to do these things with Jade once a quarter, once every 3 months, and so the next one will be about 3 months from now, possibly in March or April. And he is wanting to hear from the audience of FAIRtax Power Radio. What do you want to hear him discuss? If you've got something about the tax policy in general, if you got something about the FAIRtax that you want to pick a CPA's brain with, send it to us, your idea or your questions, to the FAIRtaxGuys@gmail.com. And I guess it's going to be up to us again. We're not really going to make this a contest with a prize like we've done in the past, but we will kind of pick what we think might make the most interesting point of discussion with Jade. And if the person who puts that forth is able to do Zoom, we'll just Zoom you in on the next. You can win an appearance on the next Wally's World. How's that?
That would be good. That would be cool.
Okay. So again, if you've got a topic that you'd like to see Jade talk about in the next seminar, I guess we call them seminars and not webinars now, send it to the FAIRtaxGuys@gmail.com, and we'll just see what we get.
And meanwhile, people can go to FAIRtax.org and sign up. In fact, if you go to FAIRtax.org and scroll down on the main page, you'll see information where you can sign up. You'll see a sign-up form there. If you haven't already, all right, sign up with them. You won't get spam, but then you'll get the chairman's report on every week. You'll get Jim Bennett's Grassroots Corner, and you'll get a brief email, a preview of the FAIRtax guys. And if you want to go to FAIRtax.org and click the news button on top, you'll see all these articles on that page. So this helps you keep informed. It helps you be a knowledgeable FAIRtax supporter. So we encourage you to do this.
All right. And as always, we remind you that I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
The FAIRtax Guys reminding you that the FAIRtax is the only truly fair tax. And once you understand it,
you'll demand it. Follow the FAIRtax Guys on social media and their own website, FAIRtaxGuys.com. And check back every week for a new episode of FAIRtax Power Radio.